So the book that we're talking about today is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, with commas after each tomorrow? Yes, I don't know why. I noticed that she had commas in between. Do you know where the title comes from? Because I did not write it.
No, they said something.
They did further on in the book. Did you get a chance to read it?
I read it, but I didn't read every word because it was not much of a
Okay, right, okay, so that's, I wanted to, So did you both read it, or you, no, yes, no, okay.
tortured me to read it.
She tortured, okay.
No, it wasn't my kind of a book at all.
So, all right, so maybe a little bit of explanation and why did I pick it, and so I try to pick as varied a selection of books as I can, and so the next one is totally different, also totally different in length. It's very little, translated from the French by a French Quebecois author, very different. And this book was like so hyped up in all the book clubs we're doing, which doesn't usually mean that doesn't mean I necessarily do it just because other book clubs are doing it, or because it's on a TV show, like one of those talk shows, but we had done, I don't know if any of you were here or remember, we did her book, The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. Remember that one? Remember that one? Yeah. So that was a while ago. She's actually written a lot of books. She's a young woman, and if you look at I don't know if anybody, like those of you who read it, saw the picture of her. And she is of mixed Korean and Jewish background, a Jewish, like Eastern European father, and a Korean mother who went to America when she was 9 years old, raised as a Catholic. That's her mother. So very mixed and similar to the characters in this book. Those of you who read it will know. So that's one of her big things. But A.J. Fikry was a small book, and it was very easy to read, and it was all about books. 2017, I believe, was when that book came out, and I really enjoyed it, and I think we all enjoyed it, those of us who read it, and so then I thought, okay. And I also usually try and not pick books that are over a certain length, because, I don't know, just in case people only have it for a week and aren't able to read it. So I generally do not pick books that are over, I try to get it as close to 350 pages as possible, but usually not, like I want 600 pages, which doesn't mean it's not necessarily a fast read. And this book, by the way, is just 400 pages, or not even, 397 pages to be exact. But I think it felt a little bit longer, and at least it did to me as I was reading it. Not that it's difficult or the language is too complicated or anything, it's just, and so I guess a couple of you who made the comment said felt the same way, but I thought, all right, well, like as I say, I try to do a mix of American or Canadian or European, different things with different topics, with different time settings. Anyway, I thought, okay, and it was about gaming, and I thought maybe that's interesting because I don't know anything about gaming. I do not have ever have gamed or played video games, so I thought maybe this would be an interesting world. That's what the novel is about. Anyway, mixed reviews, I gather, for those of you who read it. And interestingly, very mixed, like once in a while I look at Goodreads. Does anybody look at Goodreads? Yeah. So it's this, and you look up a book and then it's got a list of, it's useful information, but then it has these readers' reviews. And this was an interesting book to read the reviews on, because a number of reviewers, and again, they're not professional reviewers, they're just people who read the book and they say whatever they want, and but the beginning ones were all, I picked up this book and I thought that it was going to be so wonderful because I read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry all those years ago, and now I was reading this. And I'm a little scared to say, but I was disappointed in the book because, and then the next one would say, because it's as if you were expected to like it, because she wrote A.J. Fikry, and she's quite a a well-respected writer, but anyway, so you're not alone if you did not find it compelling, and if you found it long, and if you found it a little bit tedious. And then of course there were those who thought it was wonderful. I also tried to look up not only the Goodreads reviews, because those are the amateurs, but the actual, you know, the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Guardian and those respected reviewing journals to see what they said as well. But maybe I should begin by just, so wait a minute, again, sorry, who read, you read, so only three, so three of you, all right. Pardon?
The goody goodies.
The goodies.
I plan to read it. I'm looking forward to it, actually. I have finally received the book.
Oh, okay.
I think it looks really fascinating.
I mean, it is, and again, it's, you know, reading is always personal, and what one person likes, another person doesn't, and there's nothing to say, especially to me in fiction, unless it's so egregiously, you know, badly written that you could criticize a novel on that, or there are no characters that are well developed, or no plot, you know, otherwise it's personal taste. Like, people will love a book and somebody else will say, oh, I didn't find it interesting at all. So there's nothing to say that you have to like it or you don't have to like it. But this book is, so she wrote it in 2022, so I guess she was writing it during COVID, because I found an interesting interview with her in one of the Harvard papers. She's a Harvard graduate, by the way. There's a lot of, at least a number of, not say autobiographical, but things that are similar from her own life, it turns out, and the characters in her novels, which I guess it becomes a composite. She too she was born in New York, lived in New York, and then moved to LA, whereas I think she lives in LA now, and so she has the characters in the book. There are scenes in LA and there are scenes on the East Coast, especially in Boston, where the story opens. And she too went to Harvard, so when she sets the opening scene in Boston or around Harvard, she knows about what she's writing. The mix of parentage, that her mother is also Korean and her father is Jewish, as is the character Sam in the book. He has a Korean mother and a Jewish. Yeah, that's right, Korean, because the Korean grandparents, and Jewish on the other side. So it's an interesting mix, and you can see what she pulls from. So tomorrow, I didn't realize where the title came from, but I won't just a minute before that, because it's not I went back to check to see, is that like the epigram of the book, because that's always interesting to look at, a little whatever poem, quote, whatever they, sometimes not so little, but in this case just a brief quote, is from Emily Dickinson. And what's the quote, what's the epigram? That love is all there is all we know of love with the capital L. It is enough. The freight should be proportioned to the groove. I don't know, Emily Dickinson. Okay. The book is going to be about love and friendship, particularly, romantic love, but friendship is one of the main themes of the book. I'm not quite sure what the freight should be proportioned to the groove line is about. Any ideas, anybody? Emily Dickinson poetry. Anyway, that's the epigram. So you figure, okay, it's going to be about love. Not so sure about the freight and the proportion to the groove part of it, but love. That love is very important. So no mention of that, and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And then the book has, interestingly, it's divided into sections. There are 10 sections. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I shouldn't say there's nothing, because the last section of the book is called Freights and Grooves. So that ties that part in. But the first section, the opening section of the book, is called Sick Kids. And that's where the story opens. And we meet there are three main characters in the story. You have Sam Mazer, and you have Sadie Green, and then you have a third character in the trio, and his first name is Marx, and he has a Japanese family name. And when the book opens, so you're wondering what year are you in, because the book is quite a lengthy story. It spans about 3 decades of the character's life. So it opens up and it goes back and forth. And I think she did that very well, that she was able to move back and forth. Because when the book opens, it's 1995. And this is actually, I found it very interesting because it's not ancient history, 1995, but it is now almost 30 years ago. Like, you know, it seems, at least I guess when you get older, like it seems like yesterday. 1995 seems not like, you know, the 60s, which maybe you could say are old by now, but 1995, and yet there are so many things that have changed technologically. And maybe that's one of the interesting aspects of the story, because yes, it is about gaming. So it's about, you know, the video gaming, that kind of gaming, and how things have evolved and have evolved so very quickly. And so 1995, they're almost 30 years ago, is like ancient history in the tech world. There were no cell phones then, or maybe there were, but I don't remember. But if there were these big clunky things, and certainly not almost every single person was walking around with this thing, and your whole life is on this device. That was not yet. People had to make phone calls from phone booths, which also, you know, very rare that you see a phone booth anymore, or landlines. Most people of this generation don't have a landline and these things. And video games were just at the beginning of their creation, and computers were very different. So that part is really fascinating. She had to do a lot of research. So you could call it, I mean, do we call this historical fiction? Is the fact that it's 1995 is historical fiction. It actually goes back even a little bit before, because the opening scene is 1995. It's in a subway station in Boston near Harvard, and the two characters, Sam and Sadie, meet each other. They're 21 years old, and they knew each other from Los Angeles, where they both grew up. But the first scene is there, and you want to talk about a piece of I don't know, nostalgia, I guess, so the opening scene is, how does she introduce? Okay, let me just read you the opening paragraph. Before Mazer, M-A-Z-E-R, invented himself as Mazer, this is with a capital M, he was Samson Mazer, and before he was that, he was Samson Masur, M-A-S-U-R, a change of 2 letters that transformed him from a nice, ostensibly Jewish boy to a professional builder of worlds, again in capital letters. And for most of his youth, he was Sam on the Hall of Fame in his grandfather's Donkey Kong machine, but mainly Sam and in capital letters. Donkey Kong, does anybody remember that? Do you remember? Because I didn't.
I remember people talking about it, but I never touched them.
So it was a machine, right?
It's a video game.
A video game.
Yeah.
But it was on, there was a machine, like, because he talks about it as the Donkey Kong machine.
Atari or something.
Pardon?
The original Atari.
Yes, right. So again, you know, this is like, yeah, and that's not that many years ago, these things. Like, that's the part that is so interesting. Although, so he says, on a late December afternoon in the waning 20th century, this is the setting, the waning 20th century, Sam exited a subway car and found the artery to the escalator clogged by an inert mass of people who were gaping at a station advertisement. Sam was late. He had a meeting with his academic advisor that he had been postponing for over a month, but everyone agreed absolutely needed to happen before winter break. Sam didn't care for crowds, being in them, or whatever foolishness they tended to enjoy en masse. But this crowd would not be avoided. He would have to force his way through it if he were to be delivered to the above-ground world. And then we find out, she describes that he's wearing an elephantine navy wool peacoat that he had inherited from his roommate Marx, who had bought it freshman year from the Army Navy surplus store in town. So we know that Marx is his roommate there at Harvard, and Marx, it turns out, comes from a very wealthy family, and Sam Mazer doesn't. So Marx said he's a very, very kind, decent, he's the epitome of a kind, decent, wonderful person, the best friend, the best partner, romantic interest that one could ever have. And he begins the story that way, and so he remains until the end. And then we find out that Sam Mazer is 21 years old, that he's very small. We also, and so what is it that all these people are gathered around at this Boston subway station? There's a big ad, and everybody is standing still looking at it. So does this bring back memories? They were looking at something called Magic Eye. Do you remember that? So that's all. Remember those books? They were I saw books, calendars. It was all the thing. And you look at it quickly, and it just looks like a series of like little squares, and you can't make anything out. But you had to focus. Somehow you had to let your eyes relax. And if you did that properly, then a shape would emerge. You don't remember it? It was quite that. I mean, we all stood there and tried to like do this, and people could do it right away, and others, you just stood there and couldn't figure out what everybody else saw, and there was a trick to relaxing your eyes, and then you could see it. In fact, on the New York Times book review of the book is not a cover of this, but it took me a while to realize, what is this with the little boxes? And then I realized, it's a Magic Eye version of the cover. So yes, I mean, as I say, and we bought books with it, and there were, posters and calendars, and all the students in the dorms at the time had these posters in their dorm rooms. Anyway, that was blocking the thing, and this Sam Mazer thinks this is ridiculous. First of all, he doesn't even know what it is, and he tries to do it, and he can't do it. But while he's standing there, on page 3 of the book, he meets his longtime friend, and the girl he used to be friends with when he was 11 years old, and her name is Sadie Green. She's a nice Jewish girl from Los Angeles, and they had met, we find out, because in the next chapter, after they meet again after these years, they meet in a hospital room in LA where Sadie's sister, who's 2 years old, Sadie's 11, her sister's 2 years older, her sister has leukemia and is being treated in a hospital, and Sam is there, and we find out that he's been in a terrible car accident. We don't really know any more about the car accident until the story goes on, but he's been in a terrible car accident, and his leg is shattered, and the doctors are trying to put the leg back together, as he tells Sadie when he meets her, because then we jump back. So they meet each other when they're 21 years old. They haven't seen each other in years. They're both now in Boston. Sadie is at MIT, and Sam Mazer is at Harvard. They're these extremely bright, precocious kids who met 10 years earlier in this LA kids hospital, where Sadie is there every day because her older sister Alice is there, and she gets schlepped along, and that's where she spends a lot of time. And Sam is there because they're trying to piece him back together after this accident. And they become friends there, except that what happens, and this is the beginning of this whole, is a friendship is a very important, probably love and friendship, the main themes of this book, that Sadie and they discover that they like to play video games, whatever the video games are at the time when they're 11 years old. They meet each other in the game room of the hospital. A boy is playing Super Mario Brothers, right? So it's, actually that's what Sam is playing. So Super Mario Brothers, because I kept thinking, like, what year was that seems also like, so it was 1995, that was Super Mario Brothers. I know, like, pardon?
It's still popular.
And it's still popular? Is it? Yeah?
But that I remember because I have grandkids.
Yeah.
Yes, but at that age,
Yeah.
they would play it.
And they would play it, right?
Not
So
that they would play, so I remember Super
the name, yeah, Super Mario, and everything was Super Mario, and you had all these. So, but that was kind of the beginning of it, right? Like the beginning of the video games.
Yeah,
Yeah. So this is it. They're 11 years old. They're there in LA and Super Mario, and they become friends. And so Sadie goes every day, almost every day, because her sister is there in the hospital, her parents are there, her mother's there all the time, and Sam is there because they're trying to put him back together, and he's not getting out of the hospital anytime soon. And they become friends, and they play games, and then at one point, what happens is Sadie is getting ready for her bat mitzvah, and she has to do community service or charity or some good deed. And she decides that, visiting this boy, which she's doing anyway, and it's interesting, and they're both very bright, precocious kids, that could be logged, she could log the hours, and then she would get her hours that she needs studying for this bat mitzvah program at her temple. But she never tells Sam that that's what he's doing. And when he finds that out eventually, but she likes him anyway, and she doesn't really think that there's anything wrong with it. But when he finds out, he gets very, very angry and upset, and that's it. They never see each other. He's furious with her, and he never wants to see her again. We find out her sister does not die. She's cured, goes on to become a physician in later years, because we find that out in the story. But Sam and Sadie, end of friendship. That was blossoming, that was a nice thing for each of the kids. And it's 10 years later that they meet. And they haven't seen each other since. He grows up, I don't know LA geography, but she lives in Beverly Hills. She's from a wealthy family, and he is from this K-Town, as he tells her. And she says to him, "What's K-Town?" And he says to her, "You don't know what K-Town is?" And she says, "No." And he says, "Korean town? Oh, okay, and where is that?" She asks him, and he tells her, and apparently it's not far. They're not far from each other, but they're two different worlds each of them inhabits. Sadie in her Beverly Hills world, and Sam with his Korean grandparents and who have this pizza joint with this Donkey Kong machine. And he loves his grandparents, and they take care of him because there are no parents of his own on the scene. And Sadie has a figure in her life, which is interesting. She has her grandmother, Frida, her beloved grandmother, Frida, who is a German Jewish Holocaust survivor who's become a successful real estate broker in LA. But she tells Sadie something interesting at the beginning of the book, when Sadie says to her, like the boy who I met in the hospital, he doesn't want to be friends with me anymore because he found out that the hours that I was visiting him, that I was using them for my bat mitzvah program, and he got very, very upset. And her grandmother says to her, Sadie, friendship is friendship, and charity is charity. And it is not possible to receive charity from a friend. The people who give you charity are never your friends. And she says, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." And then her grandmother says to her, "Sadie, this life is filled with inescapable moral compromises. We should do what we can to avoid the easy ones." Sadie knew that Frida was right. Still, she continued to present the timesheet for signature. This is when she's still doing her hours. She liked the ritual of it, and she liked the praise she received from the nurses and sometimes the doctors, but also from her parents and the people at her temple. There was even a minor pleasure to filling out the log itself. It was a game to her, and she didn't think the game had much to do with Sam itself. It wasn't a deception per se. She wasn't hiding the fact of her community service from Sam, but the longer it went on, this is before she doesn't tell him, the less she felt that she could ever tell him. She knew that the presence of the timesheet made it seem as if she had ulterior motives. Although the truth was obvious to her, Sadie Green liked being praised, and Sam Massour was the best friend she ever had. This is when they were 11. Sadie's community service project went on for 14 months. Predictably, it ended the day Sam discovered its existence. Their friendship had amounted to 609 hours, plus the 4 hours of the first day, which had not been part of the tally. At the bat mitzvah at the Temple Beth El, she was only required 20 hours of community service, but Sadie was given an award by the fine women of Hadassah for her exceptional record for good works. So she writes here very tongue-in-cheek. Anyways, it ended the friendship when Sam found out that this was what was going on. And Sadie, didn't really believe it, although her grandmother said to her, friendship is friendship and charity is charity. And this was a lesson that she would have to learn and remember for the rest of her life. So then we go back, and the book goes back and forth then between Boston, the present day, when Sadie and Sam are there studying. We find out about their respective lives then, but we go back and forth also to their childhood in LA, especially to Sam's, his grandparents. There are a lot of characters in the book. But an interesting point that I wanted to, so I'll come back to the book in a minute, but in the Goodreads, and I'll tell you this really, I'm scrolling through the reviews. Actually, I didn't even have to scroll. I think the first review on the Goodreads website, and I don't know, and this would be an interesting thing to find out, if anybody edits these Goodreads reviews. I mean, there must be some kind of editing to it for, I don't know, inappropriate language, but listen to this one. And I quote this little review. "My thoughts before finding out about Zevin's plagiarism and Zionism. I understand the hype. The book is well written with a lot of heart. From the moment the characters meet in chapter 2, I loved their friendship. I especially enjoyed seeing their creative process in making video games and the level of thought putting into the storytelling and quality of work." Da, 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 da. And then she says, "My thoughts now. I'm disappointed that Zevin didn't give credit to Brenda Ramiro's undistributed game Train." I don't know, anybody know that? I guess if you're in this world, you know these things. When she gave credit to plenty of other game creators in her acknowledgements. Okay, so that was whoever this person writes this. But then she adds this lovely line, which is somehow, I don't know, to me, especially disturbing. It was probably written in 2022 when the book came out. "It's sadly doubly disappointing," meaning that besides that she didn't give credit to this Brenda Romero who wrote a book about who had an undistributed game called Train, that Zevin's tie to Hadassah, a US-based Zionist women's organization, is very disappointing. I hope that the mention of Israel in the book was because Zevin wanted to add more flaws to her antagonistic character, but it appears that she shares the same beliefs. As such, despite my original rating and positive review for this book last year, I will not be reading any more of her work." And I thought, oh wow, isn't this nice? So on Goodreads, I mean, I know people can say whatever they want to. Some of the reviews are terribly written with typographical errors and grammatical errors, and they're not professionals writing. But that this is what she manages to find, this little bit at the beginning that, it's like that just, and kind of the irony of it is that Zevin, I mean, she's not really even Jewish, she has a Jewish father, and the Jewishness comes little bits and pieces in her characters, but just the nastiness of this reviewer, I don't know, it gave me a very, it really bothered me, which it shouldn't, because people write all kinds of stuff online and stupid things, but anyhow. The rest of the reviews, nobody else mentioned that. So the book continues, and we have the two characters, Sam and Sadie. So after they meet for this first time, 10 years after they hadn't seen each other, they begin to collaborate. And they become, in this 400-page story, they become collaborators, professional friends and professional collaborators. They make video games together. So really the book is about the making of video games, as well as being about friendship and about love of different kinds. The title comes from, because she mentions it further on in the story, because Marx, the interestingly named roommate, Sam's roommate, who becomes the producer for these two. Sam and Sadie are brilliant video game designers, but you need somebody to produce the video games if you're going to really make a business of it. And they actually do become very successful, and they have a gaming company, and they have employees by the end, as the story goes on. And Marx becomes their producer, their manager. He's their business guy, and he does very well at it. But he's also, what is he studying there at Harvard? He's an actor, except that he's also of mixed race. And as he says, it's kind of, and back in 1995, now you have, and that's a whole other interesting thing, because you have, it doesn't seem to matter in many productions what the color of a person's skin is, or what their, if they're of this descent or that descent. For example, what's that TV series that is so popular? Bridgerton. Yes. Bridgerton. I don't know. Bridgerton. So you've got, you could be black, you could be brown, you could be Asian, you could be whatever. It doesn't seem to matter. But one of the points that back in 1995, that I guess it wasn't so common. So if you were not white Caucasian, then you wouldn't get the role of playing a white Caucasian in a production. Anyways, Marx, the third guy, the good friend, he is studying theater, and he is in a production of Hamlet. Doesn't get the main part in Hamlet, but, sorry, not in Hamlet, in Macbeth. Sorry?
I thought it was 12th Night. No?
Well, but the title of the book comes from Macbeth, from Macbeth's speech, which he does mention it's in the book then. And so it reads, so what's the speech that gives the book its title, which we only, find out toward. So it's, and those of you who remember Shakespeare, I didn't remember that speech. You remember it? And you remember the speech?
Tomorrow creeps in steady pace.
Yes?
Yeah,
You have to memorize the speech?
well, no, because
You went to
one of my courses when I was in McGill, was a Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So
I think, so that's what it was. So it comes from, and Macbeth, the character Macbeth, speaks it in the play Macbeth, and the speech is this: tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, with commas in between, so that's why, creeps in this petty pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, brief candle, the famous, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Pretty famous speech of Macbeth, and I'm so that's what the book is based on. So, when you read this speech, then you think, okay. And at the very beginning of the book, when Sam and Sadie meet, and they meet in the children's hospital, and they're 11 years old, and they don't know each other, so Sadie notices this boy's playing Super Mario, that's Sam, and she sees that he's got a cast on his leg, and then he looks, and somehow he says to her, like, what are you doing here? And it comes out that it's because her sister is there, and he's there because, obviously he's there because he's been in this accident. So Sam says to her, he says to her, I think, are you dying? And she says, no, but my sister has, and she doesn't say, she says dysentery. And he's like, because she doesn't want to say, she's tired of saying what her sister has, and as a side effect of the treatments that her sister is undergoing, she has severe diarrhea. And she says to Sam, that's just really another word for diarrhea. We just learned that when we came into the hospital. So, and Sam says something, and at 11 years old, he already says to her, well, everybody is dying. That's just the fact of living on this earth, because we're all dying. I mean, some more imminently that they know of than others, but so this is what these two 11-year-olds are talking about. So when you have this speech, this tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, and here it says that all our yesterdays have lighted fools away to dusty death. Out, brief candle. It's a very apt quote. So it's kind of interesting, but she didn't put that at the beginning of the book. Although she has the speech later on, because Marx is in this production of Macbeth, and it's quoted. So that's where the title comes from. So again, you kind of know maybe a little bit more of the theme. But there's a lot of video gaming. So the story follows, it takes place over, I guess if you say it begins when they're 11 years old, so with that, although they don't meet again until they're 21. And then for the next couple of decades, it follows their friendship. The friendship of the three of them, because you have Sadie and Sam, who become partners when they realize they can make video games together. And Mark's is Sam's roommate and good friend, and then eventually becomes Sadie's boyfriend. And so the three of them, their lives are woven together for the whole story. And it follows them for, I guess, a couple of decades as through, 400 pages worth. She goes back and forth and fills in the timeline. We find out a little bit more about Sam's background. We find out about what Sadie's been doing till then, but there's a lot of talk about video gaming. So I think if you like that and if you're interested in it, and that's why I'd like to read all these reviews, because I figure I don't know anything about video games. I kind of also, I vacillated from finding it very interesting. She writes very well, and she has a way, a kind of lightness about her, even though what she's discussing is definitely not always light subjects. And one of the reviewers somewhere likened it to The World According to Garp, which I read also when was that written? In the 70s, I think, 78 or 71, a long time ago. And I was trying to remember, because I don't remember what it was about. I just know that his style, John Irving's style, is that he also writes kind of, on the surface it seems lightly, but then horrible things happen in his stories, right? People are, there are accidents, there are terrible things. So she has a little bit of similarity to John Irving in that her books have a lightness to them, but they're not really, it's a bit deceptive because bad things happen, and something bad does happen as the book goes along. There's an act of terrible violence, and by the end of the story, Marx is no longer in the story, and Sadie and Sam, and you wonder the whole time, because you really have the feeling, at least I did, I don't know those of you who read it, that Sam is in love with Sadie, and she loves him as a friend, but is not interested in him as a romantic partner. And that, I think to her credit, Gabrielle Zevin doesn't take an easy way and make them romantic partners in the end. She leaves it that they're very good friends and that they can be very good friends, because friendship is one of the main themes of the story. There was an interesting review in the New York Times Book Review by someone who plays and designs video games, because that's what I wanted to get an idea of what somebody who knows video games thought about the book. And he says most kids who play a lot of video games don't grow up to become avid readers. Then again, not every kid who reads a lot of books grows up to become an avid reader. But yet, in the modern gaming audience, there exists someone called the literary gamer, someone for whom reading and playing are the same voyage. So, and he says, that's what I am. And he says, and she also, Gabrielle Zevin, and she says at the end of the book that she's played video games her whole life. So she really does know things. She hasn't designed them, but she definitely plays them. And so she has, and her three main characters are, she says here, there is no artist, through one of her characters in the book, more empathetic than the video game designer. And her three main characters are Sadie and Sam and Marx, these three bright young things who plunge together into the game-making business when they were students at Harvard and at MIT. And if anything, Sadie and Sam are maybe a little bit too bright. And as so their first meeting takes place in the hospital when they're 11 years old. And when Sam is playing Super Mario Brothers, and that's where they become friends. And then, of course, there's that incident where Sadie she uses her hours and ruins a friendship, and learns her first lesson about friendship, which her grandmother tells her too, that you don't give charity to a friend. To a friend, you do things, and because they're your friend, but you don't give charity. It's not called charity. It shouldn't be charity. So, Sadie, learn this in life, because otherwise you're not going to have any friends if you're going to lose them the way you lost Sam back when they were 11 years old. They do reconnect, and they do on and off. They have their ups and downs. Their friendship definitely is a very bumpy road. They are, and so we meet these three characters. Sam and Marks are both, interestingly, mixed race Asian Americans, as is Gabrielle Zevin herself. Sam is the Korean American mix, and Marks is a Japanese American mix. And somehow, why does she put these characters, why does she do that to them? So probably some of the most interesting the most psychologically interesting material in the book is to do with their mixed races. Like they don't quite feel at home in one world or in another. They're complicated feelings of not belonging. And Sadie, on the other hand, both parents are Jewish, so she doesn't have that added bit. And when she and Sam, and what happens, remember that bit at the beginning when she and Sam meet then at that subway, when Sam is trying to figure out how to get through a crowd and he doesn't understand what those people are standing there looking at that poster because he doesn't get it and he can't see it, and Sadie explains to him that it's called the magic eye and you let your eyes relax, and anyway, they have this, and as she leaves, and he's been longing or hoping to have seen her all these 10 years that he hasn't seen her. He'd heard that she'd gotten into MIT, and he was hoping that they would meet up in Boston one day, and then they do eventually. They have this, and she seems very happy to see him, and she's very friendly, and then she says, oh, I'm sorry, I can't stay. I have a class to go to, and I'm also on my way to my boyfriend's place. And so she leaves that little bit out there so he knows that she has a boyfriend. Anyway, she gives him a copy. She gives him a copy of a video game that she's designed. She leaves him with that, and she says, okay, bye. When you have a chance, play it and let me know what you think. And he says, but I don't have your phone number. How am I going to get in touch with you? And she says, oh, you have my email address. I wrote it on the game. So at least, okay, they're going to be able to be reconnected. But I thought this was interesting. What's the title of that video game? Her first attempt at designing a video game. The title of it was called Solution. Remember that? So it didn't mean anything to me right away. But then, when you learn what the game is about, it's based on, turns out, her grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. And so the game is that the players have to, how did she word it? The setting of this video game is in the Third Reich. So then you realize, oh, it's fine with the final solution, but that's not what she calls it. She just calls it Solution. The idea of Solution, this video game that Sadie designed, was that if you asked questions and didn't keep mindlessly building widgets, your score would be lower, but you would find out you were working in a factory that supplied machine parts to the Third Reich. Once you had this information, you could potentially slow your output. You could make the bare number of parts required not to be detected by the Reich, or you could stop producing parts entirely. The player who did not ask questions, the good German, would blithely get the highest score possible. But in the end, they would find out what their factory was doing. Fracture-style script blazed across the screen. I guess that's a type font. Congratulations, Nazi. You have helped lead the Third Reich to victory. You are a true master of efficiency. Q. Mitty Wagner. I know this must be all gaming stuff. The idea of Solution was that if you won the game on points, you lost it morally. So that was interesting. That was the first video game that Sadie designs, and it's to do with, and she calls it Solution, but that's what it's about. So it goes back to this idea of being moral, being decent, and that theme is going to be throughout the book as well. So anyway, that's the first bit. The story goes on, as I said, it follows this trio over the years that they become successful gamers, the ups and downs of their gaming business, which as various reviewers who are gamers themselves say, it's a very difficult industry, like in her book, if anything, it makes it seem easier than it actually is, because she doesn't, even though it seems long and she's chronicling everything, she's not even as one reviewer said, if you were really to read a book on what it's like to design a video game and, you know, bring it successfully to market, it would be a 1,000-page opus that would be terribly, terribly boring, except for one or two interesting lines when, I don't know, there was a breakthrough or the game succeeded. So that's what this book is. The book, there's a lot to, you know, and she weaves several stories into the novel along with Sam and Sadie. You have the flashbacks of Sam's childhood growing up in LA with his grandparents and his actress mother, and that's intertwined with Sadie's memories of growing up in LA. And Sam's roommate Marks gets his own storyline as he navigates being a side character, or, and I'm learning some gaming terms, MC, I guess stands for main character, and NPC.
Non-player character.
Ah, thank you. Okay, I was wondering.
It's the ones that you can't play. You go up to them, and then they have one line to say. That's all you can get out of them.
Ah, okay. Oh, you should be asking. So that's it. So he, in a way, is the NPC of these, you know, in the lives of his two closest friends. So there's a lot of material to juggle in this one novel. If you're interested in it, she accomplishes it with skillful dexterity, because a book about video gaming might seem daunting to those who have no knowledge about gaming. And I mean, there are parts that I confess I skimmed a little bit, but that's just because I guess I got lazy. Because she writes well, and she writes interestingly. It's just there's a lot of information to take in. And really the novel, despite that you'd think it's about gaming, it's more about human relationships than it is about video games. And in places, I think she puts in places where understanding about video game development becomes necessary, she kind of walks you through it step by step, which one could argue, is that a novel or is that too much? You know, you could depend on your point of view. People loved it and found it informative and interesting, or others found it just way too much material to wade through. But the book's strengths really lie in its characters. And ultimately the plot goes on, and there I think that it could have been shorter. Like sometimes I felt that 100 pages off of it, maybe because I'm not sufficiently interested in the intricacies of gaming, or I felt that following them through the 20 years of the trio of them, through their friendships and the ups and downs as well of their business, got a little bit tedious. So I don't know, those of you who read it have also, but like, at points it seemed to me, do we really need to know this? Do we really need to know this? Or you could say, this is really interesting. I got so immersed in the lives of these characters, and it was so fascinating to me, and every bit was needed. But really, it's the relationships, it's the friendships between the three main characters, Sam and Sadie and Marks. And they are all sympathetic characters who you can't help but root for despite their flaws. I mean, we're all human beings, we're all flawed. And through them, and I guess through the length of the novel, the story depicts, and it's a really compassionate portrayal of the messy dynamics of a long and complicated friendship. And that's really what it is. She is also good at, I felt, in immersing the reader in the various settings. And there are the multiple settings. There's LA, which she knows because she lives in LA now. There is Cambridge, which she knows, the author, knows because she went to Harvard and lived there. And if anything had to be part of New York City, she knows it as well because she lived on the Upper West Side when the author graduated from Harvard. And so she's able to, and I thought she did pretty deftly, whether you think it's long or not, but she was able to deftly jump between perspectives and timelines, and you lead the reader, and we, the reader, are led through a pretty sweeping representation of the places that her characters call home. I guess around the halfway point of the story, I thought it started to drag a bit. And the plot, I didn't think quite justified, as I said, quite justified its length. After Sam and Sadie's first success with their first game, which they called Ichigo, after a Japanese character, and that was interesting too. When they're developing this character, so it's Sam and Sadie working on this. They decide they're going to create a game together. They give it this Japanese name, and it's about a wave that sweeps a little. Well, so is it a boy? Is it a girl? A character. And so they debate whether it should be a boy or a girl, and in the end, and then they decide, no, it could be, like, it's not important whether it's a boy or a girl. They call it they, which, I don't know back then if they were already using they. Now it's become they, that, which confuses me whenever I see it, because they is a single person who can't make up his or her mind whether it's he or she, so it's a they, but it's a one person. Anyway, pardon? Not in those years. So in the book, she has, they don't want the little cartoonish or game, whatever, character to be either, so they don't assign it a gender. But then, interestingly, and I guess that's, appropriate to the time, like probably now, almost 30 years later, it would be a different discussion. The little character, when they're trying to market the game, they're given the advice, you should make it a he. And they say, okay, they're just starting out and they want this game to succeed, and so it becomes a little boy, a he. But that was that was kind of an interesting thing I noticed. So they're first, and they have success, which is really pretty impressive. These two young kids, I guess it's mainly young kids who make video games. So they have their first success, and they continue to release more games, and they start their own company eventually, because the first game they had to find somebody to, they didn't have their own company yet, so they had to find somebody. So there's a lot of discussion on how these video games are produced, not just the people who design them, but then what happens. So that they eventually start their own company. And Marks, the third guy, the roommate, who's the third one in their trio, he turns out to be a very good producer and manager. And so Sam and Sadie release more games, and then they start their own company. And that's when it starts, I thought, to get a bit repetitive. Like, the first success was interesting, then, it would be interesting to know that they did well, but there's so much, and there's so many video games that are described. And again, I guess if you're interested in gaming, it's all very interesting, and it's supposed to be recreations of the real world, and there's all these references and parallels to what's real and what's not real, and how people would rather live in their video game world, where you could control or manipulate things, as opposed to real life, which is messy in a very different way. So it seemed almost as if the author tries to compensate for the flaws, or at least what I thought were the flaws in the story, by introducing new characters here and there and new plots. And then there's this subplot about marriage, equality, and there's all this stuff towards the end. Eventually, Sadie ends up having a baby, and becomes a single mother. I guess I'm not going to say it just in case somebody wants to read it. In the real world. And by the end of the story, and one of the things we meet at the beginning, who's Sadie's boyfriend when she meets Sam, and it's her professor in her gaming class, who is to me just as a pretty despicable, yucky character. He's a 20-something, and here, and I thought of this vicious, nasty Goodreads comment review that she describes him. His name is Dov, and he's Israeli, and he has a wife and a son back in Israel, and he's the brilliant, gaming professor at MIT, Sadie's professor, who happens to really like to sleep with college girls. And so Sadie is his fling at a time, and he tells her, my wife and I are going to get divorced, which is like the oldest line in the book. And she, this brilliant, I guess being brilliant in academically is nothing to do with being smart, and he's her boyfriend, and he's horrible. He's just disgusting. He hangs around, he appears periodically, And at the very end of the story, he reappears and he says to Sadie, how about, and she hasn't seen him in a while, and he says to her, would you like to teach my course at MIT? I'm going back to Israel and I'm trying to find a substitute for, and she says, okay. And she and her daughter, who she names Naomi, which is an interesting name, I thought, because I guess it works on a Jewish level, but it also works on a Japanese level. It's apparently a popular name in Japan as well. And they move back, or Sadie moves back to Boston after all those years, because she'd been living in LA, and that's where the book ends. And Sam is still her friend. The end, they rename, at least there's an ending where they're still friends at the end of the book. And,
Who's the father?
pardon?
Who's the father? Oh, and Dove is the father?
No, Mark's, yeah. It turns out because she eventually, she doesn't get together with Sam, although he's, pining for her, but is Mark's, so he's the half Japanese, half American, and he dies in the story, and she's left a single mother. So there's a lot of these, Sam was brought up with a single mother as well. So that's the father of this little girl. So the mixed race continues, because that seems to be one of her themes. It kind of pulls itself together at the end. Like the last 50 pages, after there's all this in the middle, which I think some of it could have been, at least in my mind, could have been edited a little more. The last 50 pages show the author's skill as a writer, because she's able to bring the threads of the story together in a believable and poignant finale. Although, there was a lot of meandering along the way, it finally gets to its destination. And the destination, I think, is pretty emotionally satisfying. And interestingly, one of the reviewers said that the novel's approach to representation and these mixed, that Sam and Sadie are both, Sadie is not of mixed heritage, she's Jewish, but Sam is this Korean-American character, and she integrates this part of it with thoughtfulness and with nuance, which fits because that's herself, that's her own background. And is it worth to read? I mean, it depends, okay? Some will say definitely no, it was too long, it dragged out. Other people loved it, found it fascinating, said they learned a lot about gaming in it. And there was a lot, and if you don't know anything about gaming, which I don't, then it is interesting.
It's easy to skip over a lot of it.
Yeah.
So that's it. You can skim over and you don't lose, right? No. Yeah.
That's what I.
Yes.
I think it's popular with a lot of young people who grew up with gaming.
So maybe that's it. Maybe we're older and I don't know. They don't read. They don't read. That's interesting.
But what I wanted to say was, for example, I guess I mentioned to my daughter, in the Happy Diamond book review series, there's this book I'm looking forward to reading, and maybe you would be interested because she works in the video game industry.
Oh.
And she said, I have it. And it's going around, with
Oh,
their
really?
who are all in their, mid-30s to, mid-40s type of thing. And it's hugely popular with them. And it's rare that our reading overlaps,
Interesting.
So I thought that was really interesting.
That's
So I'm
interesting.
interested to read it. I haven't.
Yeah.
I just got into it myself.
Yeah.
But, it is going around in that circle.
That's interesting to know. Yeah.
Gabrielle Zevin herself, I think, she was born in
77. Yeah.
So that would make her, about 47?
44.
44, yeah.
Oh, 77.
So,
It's interesting for
No.
people
No,
that grew up with
the
the
math is
gaming.
not math.
For people that grew up with the gaming, they
Yeah.
had to read it because of the gaming.
Yes.
For me, where it didn't matter about
Yeah.
the gaming.
Yeah.
For me, it was really interesting, all the characters, the mixed race and the way she got them together, and the fact that she was doing the community work and,
At the beginning, yeah, that was funny.
There
And
were a lot of things that were interesting in it, but for me, I was interested how they developed a business
Uh-huh,
and how businesses develop.
yeah,
You know, you take anybody like even this Bezos guy, you know, with the Amazon and everything, how they develop, they start like from one thing and they just go on, and they have this idea of how to develop a business, you know? To me, that's very important because you can be very smart in something, but you don't know how to develop.
well, so that's where, in the book she has, that's where, right, so they have the Sadie and the Sam are the two brilliant designers, but they're not necessarily business people, and that Marx, who was not a designer at all, he was an aspiring actor, I mean, he didn't really have to worry about money is clearly stated from the beginning, but he turns out to be their producer, and so he's needed. So yeah, so we learn a lot about, yes, very, of course.
All kinds of good ideas.
But you need somebody to put them into, to run a business. I mean, it's a totally different skill, yeah. But that's really interesting. So maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe you have to be, yeah.
And also work in the industry, I think, because, for example, this sleazy professor in the video game industry, you know, I don't know if you remember the news a few years ago, Ubisoft, for example, was in the news because of a lot of harassment going on at top levels
Yeah.
from the
Yes.
male hierarchy
Yeah.
towards female employees. And this is rampant in the industry.
Is it still?
Yes.
Oh, that's good that you say that because
So I think,
yeah.
you know, like.
there's that.
Yeah.
It's true. Thank you for bringing that up because in the book, you haven't read it, but bye-bye. In the book, she mentions it because so at the beginning, even when they make their first game, this Ichigo and you know, is it going to be a little boy, a little lady, the character male or female? And they decide, no, it doesn't matter. And then they're told by the marketing person when they don't have their own company yet. So you know who's going to. They're selling trying to find a buyer, somebody interested in producing it. And he says, make it a he. It sells much better. And then even though of the two of them, it seems like Sadie is the better of these, the more brilliant. They're both brilliant and precocious as kids, but she is the real artistic, brilliant one behind the two of them. But it works out that Sam gets the credit, and it's back then, okay, so we're talking 95, 96, those years, and how it just was kind of the way it was. But to her credit, she doesn't make it, you know, she doesn't beat it over the readers' heads that this is, you know, the terrible and this is how it, you know, males and how Sadie is. So it's done very subtly, and it just kind of worked out like that. That Sam was the one who they were more interested in interviewing Sam when they had to do promotions for it, and how the whole industry, but like you say, that industry is a male industry. I mean, it was even more so back then. I didn't know that it's still so, but it kind of
It's very
is.
sexist. Think of some of the games, you know, you can imagine. It really appeals to teenage boys' fantasy.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I don't know any of them, so I don't know.
They're not all
Yeah.
like this. I mean, there are some very educational games and so on, so it really depends, but there are certain ones like that. What else was I going to say about it?
Yeah, and who designs those things, right? Yeah.
There are a number of interesting points. As you were speaking, I was thinking, okay, I see where that interest would come from. Oh yes, the whole business of race and so on, and gender in terms of the characters. This is a big thing in, you know, like you were saying, Marx, is he an actor or whatever?
Yeah.
Roles?
Yeah.
No, he's not an actor in the video game industry, he's an actor.
No, it was just when he was at Harvard, because he had to study something, he had wealthy parents, so he could, you know, play around, and then he becomes their producer, then he becomes the businessman, the brains behind their business.
Because there's a big thing in the industry too about, now, anyway, at least about representation of different.
Yes, so you know what's really interesting, I just wanted to point this out, I mean, I know it's kind of, over, I can't see, if you have to go, but, so I thought this was very interesting. Towards the beginning of the book, when they're trying to figure out what they're going to call their first video game, Sadie and Sam, and so they decide that they were going to style it after this piece of art, this print that was ubiquitous in the dorm rooms of the kids at Harvard, and it was a Japanese print of a wave, and it was called Wave at Kanagawa, the Great Wave, arguably the most famous Japanese artwork in the world, and in the 1990s, as she writes here, it was an absolute MIT student housing staple, only slightly less ubiquitous than those magic eye prints that Sam always felt it couldn't do. The Great Wave depicts an enormous wave that dwarfs the other elements in the frame, 3 fishing boats and a mountain. The style is clean and graphic, befitting the fact that it was designed to be carved into a cherry wood block and infinitely reproduced. Okay, so they're gonna make this is their first video game, they call it Ichiko. But what was so interesting, she writes here, and there are parts where it's a novel, but it's almost as if she's writing essays. Because writes Gabrielle Zevin, she says, it was 1996, so this was the year that this is taking place, and the word appropriation never occurred to either of them, Sam or Sadie. They were drawn to those references because they loved them and they found them inspiring. They weren't trying to steal from another culture, though that is probably what they did. So there's this reference to cultural appropriation, because so as you say, back in 1996, you didn't have to worry about cultural appropriation. Nowadays, you have to be extremely careful and couldn't do the things. So this is historical fiction, if you want to call it. It's sort of interesting to think of it like that. But talk about cultural appropriation and how, even just in those 30 years, how things that you maybe would have been able to say or do, you can't do now because of, whatever the correct term is for this, that you have to be very careful with everything. So that's interesting too.
And one last remark too I'd like to make is, I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure if you're a member of the Goodreads community, which you can get an account.
Right, you can comment on a review.
Yes,
Yeah.
you can reply.
Yeah.
So you would,
Yeah.
at least you would be able to respond to.
Yeah. Found, okay.